Hey, good day, fellow deal makers. Welcome to 2023. This is our first recording on the Deal Scout, and I want to introduce you to Christina. Christina, welcome to the Deal Scout.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Christina, who are you?
I love this question. I am here's what I would say at a dinner party or a any sort of casual conversation. I'm a human Venn diagram. I have built a career at the intersection of business, technology, and the arts. Currently, that means I'm a professor of entrepreneurship and marketing at Harvard Business School. I'm an angel investor. I'm an author and a public speaker, but that's just the current incarnation. Ask me again in 4 years, and it might look like a very different mix.
Sure. I was just having a conversation with some guys in my community, and one of the questions of identity came up, like this
Mm-hmm.
question, and I spent a lot of time asking this question. And you said you've given yourself this grace and this out, saying that this is what it currently is.
Yep.
I'm a Venn diagram,
Mm-hmm.
meet at the intersection of arts,
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurship, and what was
Mm-hmm.
the other one?
Technology.
And technology. All right. This sounds like you spent a lot of time preparing for those kind of casual conversations, dinner parties.
Mm-hmm.
Um, why was that important to you to come up with that?
So I have spent my entire life with sort of one foot, one hand, one appendage in a bunch of different circles. That sounds a little dirty, but I didn't mean it that way. The point is, I have always been someone who delights in being in a lot of different circles, communities, industries, and I like finding the connections between them. That sort of associative thinking between different worlds is where I thrive. And what did that look like in college? I was a double major, triple minor, and post college, I've never had just one job. I've always had multiple sources of income, multiple worlds that I'm networking in, and it became really difficult to introduce myself.
Yeah.
I finished my MBA. I was building my first startup, and I would go to these pitch competitions or networking events with VCs, and you get 60 seconds at best to catch someone's attention before they move on to someone else. And I realized that when I started saying, I'm a theater producer, I'm a classical musician, I'm also a computer science geek, I code, I love math, I'm building this fashion, right? Like you sound like you're a dilettante. You sound like you're flailing. And when people are trying to assess, should I invest time, money, energy into you? A dilettante, it sounds like someone who's going to change their mind tomorrow about what they're doing. And that's not someone I'm going to put more of myself into. So I realized I needed a way to talk about who I am that connects those dots, that shows you that I am just as intentional and strategic about how these different things in my world connect as I am in anything I build. But that also means I might zig and zag. I expect to zig and zag in my career. That is the career I'm building. And so I don't know, this was probably 2015, 2014. I sat down and I tried to think about how on earth do I connect these dots? And I was a math major. I loved math, and Venn diagrams just kept coming back. This is before they became like the meme language that everyone knows them as today. But I was like, you know what? I sit at this intersection, and I love this phrase. And so I just threw it. I think I might have even been tipsy the first time I threw it off in one of these conversations. But the investor just clung. He was like, I get that. Tell me more. I was like, okay. Tell me more is the entire goal of answering the question, who are you, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
permission to continue the conversation. And so I decided that was going to be my phrase, and I started using it in kind of introductions. It's in my bio, it's on my Harvard faculty page, and people freaking love it because it gives them a framework that allows them to be multidimensional, right? And
Yeah.
everyone is multidimensional, but we've been told that we need to look serious, and so we carve off these pieces of us to look like we're focusing, when in reality those other dimensions might be where you connect with someone.
Yeah, so awesome. This is hitting home. What I love about being a podcast host is you get free therapy and you get free. I'm constantly working on self, and this hits so true to home because I've had a lot of jobs. I've built a lot of stuff. I've been an entrepreneur. Just that word freaks a lot of people out. I've had people
Mhm.
almost have anxiety attacks when they're like, "So what do you do?" Or they ask my wife, they're like, "What does he do?" And she's like, "I don't know. You have to ask
I
him,
don't know.
right?" Right? So like this idea of giving yourself permission to do this, because
Mhm.
for an entrepreneur, sometimes describing who you are is the hardest thing. The identity of an entrepreneur is hard because
It can
sometimes you have to
be
do a lot.
like paralyzing, right? This idea of like, you want me to sum up all the things I do?
Yeah.
What day of the week is it? Like, I'll
Yeah.
tell you what I am today because maybe this morning you had to be an accountant and this afternoon you have to be the trash collector in the office, right? Like, as an entrepreneur, you are wearing 75 hats always. And so I love this idea that identity is not about what you did today or even this week. It's not about what you do. It's about who you are. So how can you find the vocabulary, the ideas, the scaffolding that people need to understand, who is this person? You got to give them something to latch onto. How can you give them something that still elevates this conversation about who you are, what you care about, what impact you want to make, what you want to leave behind as your legacy? That's totally different from what's on your calendar today.
Yeah. The difference between a crazy person and someone who's eccentric is someone who has money, right? Money is
Yeah.
the or success, right?
So true.
So if you're struggling and you're
Mm-hmm.
this human diagram, Venn diagram, but you're
Mm-hmm.
struggling and you're not
Mm-hmm.
gaining traction, an investor won't invest. It's
Correct.
when you start getting traction in your life that you're like, oh, it's brilliant. Tell me more.
Exactly.
So, when's the tipping point when you become brilliant for being a serial entrepreneur or a human Venn diagram or a
Mm-hmm.
multifaceted, individual? When's the
Mm-hmm.
tipping point and how do you get there if you are
Yeah.
in the struggle? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think the key is you have to be making forward progress. It doesn't have to be any particular success metric or right. It's not about, did you exit your company and make $1 billion? Are you post economic? Or it's not about, did you reach a certain title within your company? It's more about, are you making progress on whatever this life is that you want to build? Are you going forward? Or if I meet you today and then I meet you again in 2 years, we're having the same conversation. You haven't made any forward progress in any dimension of who you are,
Mm,
right? Flailing is treading water. You're not making progress. So I don't really care what success, what level of success I would attribute to you, because I'm not living your life. It's not up to me. But I want to know that you have a sense of where you are going and that the effort you're putting into your life day in and day out is net moving you forward. Not every day is going to be progress. I
mm.
am very familiar with failure. I am 100% familiar with taking bets that don't pay off. But on the whole, more bets need to pay off than not. More steps need to be made forward than not. And you need to have the clarity to communicate what that progress looks like to me, the outsider, the investor, the whoever that person is. If you can't connect the dots, then you can't possibly expect me to connect the dots.
Yeah. I find as investor or when I was in venture capital or when I'm working with an entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
if they're flailing,
Mm-hmm.
it seems or when I or when I'm flailing because that happens too as an entrepreneur. Uh, when that's happening, I hear this: focus in, get traction,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
part of your thesis on life as a
Mm-hmm.
human Venn diagram,
Mm-hmm.
how does that come into play when it comes to diversification? We use that word in the
Mm-hmm.
green room prior to hitting
Mm-hmm.
record versus focus
Yeah.
when it comes to getting traction in life and net forward progress.
Absolutely. So diversification is potentially the very favorite concept I learned in my entire MBA education. And I was doing this before I came to business school, but it finally gave me the word, the permission to do more than just one thing. It's so much of being seen as legitimate in life, honestly, is having the vocabulary, the permission, the label for the thing that you already feel and do. But this idea of diversification, I mean, as any investor knows, it's just you don't put all of your eggs in one basket, because we do not have control over the outcome of anything we do. We can put in a lot of effort. We can think through things carefully. We can be strategic and intentional and work really hard. And there are still outside forces that might stymie our efforts. So if you are not 100% in control of an outcome, you better not put all of your energy into that one thing, because it may not work out through no fault of your own. And so to me, that says, if I'm thinking about my career, my life, my portfolio, all of these things, I want to be placing multiple bets. Now, if you think about portfolio allocation, you don't want 2% across 50 bets, because even if one of them pans out, you're getting a 10x return on 2% of your portfolio, right? It doesn't move the needle. So you want to be thoughtful. Am I placing 10 bets at 10% each? Am I placing maybe 20 bets and I'm leaving some capital to follow on the ones that I'm seeing succeed? You do the same thing in your professional life. Maybe you have a day job that gives you guaranteed income that you could count on in a cash flow forecast for your family. It might give you insurance, an amazing thing to have in these great United States of America. And it might give you some stability, maybe even has some other benefits like specific working hours. You know that you have these hours that you're dedicating to the job and all the other hours are free. Not all jobs give you that, but some do. So you're like, okay, this gives me some things that I need, but not everything I need. So what are some of the other places that I can invest my energy, my talents, my network to get other pieces? Maybe your day job doesn't really fulfill the creativity part. Maybe you like making things, but your day job doesn't ask you to make things. Okay, so that's what your nights and weekends are for. That's what you start a podcast. It lets you make something. It also gives you an excuse to meet really interesting people. Everyone says yes to being on a podcast.
Everyone says yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and as you said, you basically get free therapy for an hour, but everyone else gets to listen to it.
Exactly.
Or maybe you start a blog. Maybe you, I don't know, start a photography business and you advertise on Instagram. There are so many things that you could make in your free time that might give you some autonomy, creativity, extra income source, as well as access to a network and an opportunity, a platform to be seen differently in that piece of your life. Now, let's say you get to the point where your day job lays you off because everyone's cutting costs right now. Inflation sucks. Well, you didn't just lose your entire source of income, your identity, your reason to put on pants in the morning. You didn't lose that when this thing fell apart, because you still have this whole other part of you that maybe it shouldn't be 100% of you, but it's something. It's something that you still have in play. And that gets you out of bed, it keeps you going, and it buys you the space to figure out what next for this other piece of your life that just needed to be rebalanced. So it's absolutely a happy medium between all in on one thing and tiny little bits of time, money, effort, momentum invested in a bazillion things. There still needs to be an investment thesis. Mm-hmm. There still has to be a theme. What am I doing here? And as I am very much in this point in my life, there are chapters of your life where some things you might need to pull that allocation down to zero. I have 2 small children right now, 9 months and 3 years old.
Yikes.
Yes. Third cup of coffee at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
There are a great number of pieces of my portfolio that are currently at a 0% allocation. because my children are taking up a big piece of my time, my money, my brain space, my sleep, all these things. But it doesn't mean they're gone. They're just at a 0% allocation for now. And when I'm ready, I rebalance my portfolio for the next season, the next chapter, when I'm heading into that. When my kids are in school full time, I'm going to have a very different portfolio. So it's so similar to how you think about investing. It's the same thing. Your life is your enterprise. Invest in it, manage it accordingly.
Yeah. Wow. Super cool. Let's go back to 2014. You said 2014, you were struggling with this idea of, how do I describe myself to investors? I'm building these things and I'm doing this stuff, and I'm struggling finding the permission, finding the terminology, vocabulary to explain this, because at that time people were saying focus, 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 get traction. You know, all these models were coming out saying, you got to say no, find your one thing. There's book Essentialism, Gary Keller's One Thing, and McEwen's Essential. So all this stuff is about removing everything, dial in, go deep work.
Yes.
So you're struggling. Talk to us about that.
Here's what I love about this question. I was also struggling in that moment with too much. That was the year I decided to Marie Kondo my calendar. Are you familiar with KonMari, the Marie Kondo method, where you like gather all your socks and ask if they bring you joy, and then thank them for their service?
You're the second person who mentioned that name this week. Awesome.
Yes. Okay. So I lived in New York City at the time in a tiny apartment. I did not have clutter. Clutter could not exist in my life. So when she first came on the scene, I was like, she doesn't have anything to offer me. I live a very pared down physical lifestyle. But at the same time, my calendar, my time, my energy was all over the map. And it was because by 2014, I was on my third startup in 4 years. We had some early failures. And my first was in fashion. My second one was around sort of the startup community, professional development jobs. My third was building a program for getting more girls and underrepresented minorities into computer science. So on the surface, you're like, Christina, these have absolutely nothing in common. I disagree, but we'll get to that in a second. But as a result of being sort of on my third at bat in 4 years, I had all of these other things that were artifacts of previous lives, of previous efforts, that were still cluttering my calendar. Meetups, networking things, folks asking for, favors. And I had such a mindset of just say yes to everything, because you never know where opportunity is going to come from. And I still, in somewhat, believe that idea. But you can't have space for serendipity and for opportunity if you are working at 100% allocation across your calendar. Like, there was no room for luck to hit my calendar at that point. I did like a day in the life article for Forbes, the day of the human Venn diagram. And I gave them what I thought was like a pretty typical day. I didn't like exaggerate things, but I started in the morning with like a 6 a.m. workout, and then a networking, mentoring breakfast. And then I went to my day job. And then at lunchtime, I was reviewing like fundraising plans for a nonprofit I sat on the board of. And then I went to a choir rehearsal. And then I had my computer science class at NYU. I was doing a master's in computer science at the time. And, I finished the day like eating a bowl of cereal, standing up in my kitchen at like 11 o'clock at night. And all of these people who read this article, my friends, my family, start sending me these text messages of like, are you okay?
Do you need to be checked in anywhere? Are you all right?
Are you gonna burn out? Like this does not feel sustainable. And I needed that reality check. So I was like, I'm actually not okay. I do feel burned out. And when I thought through, which of these things are bringing me joy, the idea of these commitments brought me joy. That's why I said yes to them. But the actual commitments, they didn't always bring me joy. I was doing a lot of like one-off mentoring. People would send me the friend of their sister, of their, neighbor who like needed life advice. I'm not a coach. I don't know why they kept sending, they just do. And so I said yes. And I would do all of these sort of one-off conversations, and then I would never hear from this person again. Right. They would thank me, but I would never know, like,
Did it work?
was my advice helpful?
Yeah.
What happened? Right. And I realized I would so much rather spend the exact same number of hours in deeply invested in one or two or three mentees, and be able to see my impact and also get a good feedback mechanism. Is what I'm doing helpful? Than to spray and pray those hours to random folks, strangers that I was never going to talk to again. And so I literally used the KonMari method to my calendar. I gathered like items. I analyzed individual things. Were they a good fit? Were they bringing me joy? And then I went through and said no to a whole bunch of stuff. And I made space in my calendar for luck, for serendipity, and for focus. You can't focus when you're living your entire life in 30-minute blocks.
Yeah.
There's no space. So I made space for that. And I think that kind of combined with this pulling up of how do I connect the dots of these different things I care about that I'm building, it gave me the momentum to really see a through line and to be able to make progress on that.
So as you're going through this, was this around that 2014 time where you were standing up eating cereal 11 o'clock at night and you're grinding? Did you find did you find fulfillment while you were doing this, even though you might have been burnt out? Like, did you feel like you were making net progress while you were doing, because you saw activities and check marks and calendars and meetings and people, and did you feel progress?
Activity feels like progress, even if it's not, right? If you think about treading water, if you zoom in, imagine you're like a filmmaker and you zoom in on someone in the ocean and you see how much effort they're putting in, and it's like one hand after another, and you see their feet are kicking and you're like, wow, they're swimming really hard. And then you zoom out and you realize they're treading water. They're staying in the exact same place. They haven't made any progress at all, despite all this effort they're putting into these strokes. This is absolutely, I think, one of the biggest pitfalls is you can mistake activity for progress. And I love a good check mark on a to-do list. I am that person who will add things to the to-do list that I've already done in order to then cross them off, just because I feel like, wow, look at how much I've done. And I do think that you sometimes do have to kind of pull away from that, I don't know, that cult of the to-do list, of the calendar, to be able to say, am I actually going forward in any direction at all? I will tell you, this might be very personal. I specifically felt this in my dating life at the time. That I had been at this point, 2015, I had been going on all of these dates, dating in New York City. For anyone who is, you will be nodding right now. It is awful. It is awful. There are so many people, there's so much potential, and yet it is awful. So I was, post MBA, post college boyfriend, post business school boyfriend, and I was trying to figure out, like, okay, who do I want to make a life with? And I would go on all of these dates. I had a year of like just saying yes to all of these dates. And I got to the end of the year and I was like, A, this was not fun. B, none of these were the right person for me. And like, I'm no closer to finding this life partner that I was at the beginning of the year. So I took myself on a relationship offsite. I went camping solo in Maine for a week and like pitched a tent, made a fire, brought some honey whiskey and a journal. And I did a little retro on my dating history. I was like, what are the attributes? What are the qualifying criteria? I mean, I'm not joking when I tell you I apply a business framework to literally every part of my life. What are the qualifying criteria?
Bob over here is doing this and that. Yes, and I can see the Venn diagram of dating.
Imagine dating as like a sales funnel. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And it's, how do you know at the very top of the funnel, how do you know what a lead is? How do you know if someone is interesting? You could say, like, I'm attracted to them. Okay, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
Is it a sense of humor? Is it how they treat you? Is it the stories they tell and how they communicate? Is it the fact that they're conscientious? They follow up, they don't leave a text message on read, right? Like, get specific. What are the attributes, the criteria that tell you or that give you a sense of this might be someone for me? Now you put them in the sales funnel. Now they're a qualified lead. Okay, what things do you need to do to move them through that funnel? As you go on dates, what are you trying to learn? You don't go on your first date, say, are you the one? You can't possibly know that. But you could say, like, what really matters to me is that you have purpose, that you treat people with empathy, that you do what you say you're going to do, that I can trust you. Okay, what are the stories you're telling or the experiences that I'm having or the questions that I could ask that might suss out whether those attributes are true for you or not? And to really be thoughtful about, once I have evidence that the things I care about aren't true for you, that I end this.
Peace out.
Yeah. And, like, no hard feelings. It's not you. It's not me. It's just, you're not what I'm looking for. And I found myself sticking around 3-4 months into these, like, pseudo relationships with the hopes of, like, well, I should just give them another chance. Yeah. Or, like, I see the potential. They could be what I'm looking for. Like, I could maybe change them. Every woman's kiss of death right there. Yeah. I could change them. I could help them. No, partners are not projects, right? I'm looking for a partner. And that's okay if you're not my partner, but I need to recognize that and move on. And so I think you can apply this to relationships, to your career, to your actual investment thesis of your portfolio, but it's just sort of be clear on what you want, which is a ton of work.
It's a ton of work.
Be clear on what you want. And then look for evidence that this is or is not what you want. And when it isn't, cut off your resources and redirect them towards something that might be.
So, Christina, this is for someone like me, this is hard because my general purpose is to serve people, to build people, to invest in people. But as I'm learning to diversify, but also focus in my investments into people, there are people who get no's, right? There has to be, just like in the dating funnel, just like in the investment, like we just can't, our allocation of our energy, time, which energy and time is far more valuable than money.
Oh, yes.
But
especially as we get older.
Especially as we get older or have little ones.
Yes.
How do you go about saying no to those? Hey, this is my friend's cousin, sister who has a project, and I heard you're an investor. Could you give them some advice?
Yeah.
How do you say no?
One way to say no is to put pieces of you out there in a way that's scalable and that doesn't cost you anything on that incremental usage. So what does that mean? That means making a podcast that anyone can listen to for free. So when someone says, will you give them advice? Instead of me spending 30 or 45 minutes one-on-one, I point them to an episode that I think would be really helpful and say, why don't you take a listen to this? Yeah. I think this might answer some questions for you. Doing blog posts, putting ideas out in the world that other people can really benefit from. My first company failed. Quincy Apparel was a fashion tech startup in 2011 in the mode of Bonobos and Warby Parker and all of those. And after it failed, I kept getting particularly female founders who I want to be so helpful to so that there can be more of us in the world. But I kept getting the same question over and over. Tell me about why it failed so that I can learn from you and maybe avoid those mistakes. And what I realized was it was not a good use of my time to answer the same question over and over again.
Yeah.
So I partnered up with one of our investors, Tom Eisenman, who had been my professor here at Harvard, and we wrote a case study on Quincy Apparel that is unsparing in its details about why we failed. We just put it out there. And so when people started asking me questions, I could just send them the case study. point them to that and say, read this. The answers are there. And then we started teaching it, and 1,000 MBA students a year get to study why I failed, which is a delightful experience. And, but right, it's like, if you're getting the same question 3 or 4 times, put something out there that answers that question. And then when you say no to time, say yes to, you can still learn what I think would be really valuable. Here's that asset. Here is that opportunity. Similarly, when I get asked to speak at conferences or on panels that either aren't a good fit for what I think my expertise is or where I want to invest my time right now, maybe it was a topic I used to speak on frequently, but I don't really want to focus on that right now.
Sure.
Or if it's just something I can't do, like literally doesn't fit in my calendar or I don't want to travel, I don't just say no. I recommend 3 other folks that they talk to fill that spot. So it's a way of saying no that still is giving in that no, rather than the straight up no, or worse, the I'm not going to answer the email at all.
Gosh, I'm guilty of that sometimes because do you have a podcast? I think you have a podcast, right?
I used to. I did. It's called The Limit Does Not Exist. We had 3 seasons of it.
Oh, amazing. I would love to hear, this is a 2-pronged question.
Sure.
Tell us why you started it and why you stopped it.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you had to attribute one thing to the business failure of Quincy, what was it?
Sure. Okay, 2 prongs. We'll start with the podcast. Started the podcast in 2016 it's actually an inbound opportunity. Forbes, I've been writing for Forbes at the time as a columnist, and they were dabbling in podcasts. Yeah. It was at one point in time, it was a novel thing. And one of the editorial leaders there reached out and said, we're thinking of doing this. Is there a topic that you would like to host a show on? And at the time, I was building this program for girls in computer science. And one of the things I noticed and loved, these were high school and middle school girls, was that in the interview for the program, this was the program was housed at the American Museum of Natural History. So it's a science museum teaching computer science. In the interview, I asked all of the girls to bring something that they had made that they were proud of. And to a girl, every single one brought something artistic. Cool. A dance they had choreographed, a piece of music they had written, composed, an artwork that they had made. None of them, I gesture a lot, none of them felt that it was contradictory to be creative and a coder. Yeah. They hadn't yet had it beaten out of them that you have to be like this technical person and you can't be an artist as well. And I was like, this is everything that I always wanted. As a double major in math and theater, like I would have killed to have that precedent just out there in the world that you can be both. And so I pitched that idea to Forbes. I said, I want to do a show about the and, not the or, about this intersection of STEM and the arts. And they said, sure, okay, fine, whatever. and so I found a co-host, Kate Scott Campbell, who is this actress and producer in Hollywood who tutored math on the side, had made some really great content around girls in math. And we created this weekly show where we interviewed folks who had built careers at the intersection of STEM and the arts in a super kind of non-linear, zigzaggy way. And we had some of the most fascinating guests. We have one incredible woman who has a PhD in astrophysics and is a professional ballerina. Wow. And she literally zigzags her time between like dancing on the stages of Europe, classical ballet, and doing like astrophysics research and training. She wants to be an astronaut someday. And like it just goes on from there. We interviewed folks who are into like fashion and biology, and we're looking into like sustainability of like fabrics that could be applied to the fashion industry. Just all over the map, some of the most interesting folks. And it was a great time. I really loved getting to make something and get it out there and get that rapid feedback from an audience. Sometimes when you build a startup, you're working on something for a year or two before you see like, is there there? You make a podcast, you know right away if people hate it. Yeah. And, as you know, it gave me the excuse to reach out to some of the most incredible people and get them to say yes to talking to me for an hour. And at the same time, as you know, podcasts are hard work.
It's a lot of work.
To do it well, especially as the space got more crowded and everyone had a podcast. To do it well is hours upon hours of work. And there got to a point where I was like, I think we've told the story we came to tell, that we are not weirdos, random anomalies in the world. Creatives, technical folks, that intersection, there's a lot of us. And I think we're at a good stopping point. And so it was sort of right in the middle of 2020, the pandemic hit, the world got turned upside down, and we got to a point where we're like, I think we've told that story, and we decided to wrap it up.
Okay, so the second question.
I see I've stunned you speechless.
My job as a podcast host is to ask the questions, the crazy ass questions that come to my brain, but also that in my audience. What questions would they ask? And sometimes that's hard because sometimes they conflict, and then sometimes I'm confused. But the second question was, if you had to identify one thing about
why did Quincy
startup,
fail?
why did Quincy fail?
This is the question I've been working on for 10 years now.
Yeah.
Here's what I would come to. The conclusion after having taught this case dozens of times. They talk a lot about product market fit in early stage companies, right? People are making something that no one wants. You're making something that's a nice to have, but no one will change their behavior for. They're happy to take it for free, but they don't want to pay for it. Product market fit, so crucial to figure out. But that wasn't our problem. We actually tested that and had product market fit. What we didn't have was product operations fit. So we were making something with a real product. We're making clothes. And there's inventory attached to that. There are very costly choices that you make along the way when you're making a physical product that if you get it wrong, it costs a lot of money to fix. And we had a unique approach to sizing. We thought we were going to change how women's clothes were sized. We would try to make them a little bit similar to men's clothes, where you actually have some dimensions, some measurements involved, and not just a 4. Women's clothes are ridiculous. So we had some operational changes to the product as well as to the distribution. How we were going to manage all of the SKUs that would result from these sizing changes came into how we were going to build our supply chain. And to do those things required a lot of tinkering, experimentation, failures. That's expensive. And we didn't raise nearly enough money from the right investors. We took tech investor money. 2010, 2011, there was a lot of VC tech money going into what I would now call retail companies with a website. At the time, we called them fashion tech, but it was just e-commerce brands, retail companies with a website. And so the investors wanted to tranche their investment. They're trying to limit their downside. But so they're doling out little bits of money at a time, and they don't have a clear understanding of what progress might look like or what it would cost to run these experiments. And so we get to a point where we're actually starting to it's starting to click and we're out of money. But we haven't made enough progress to raise the next round at a higher valuation. And they didn't want to bridge. They were really uncomfortable with this idea of inventory in the first place. So it's a lot of these moving pieces, but I would really peg it down to product operations fit. We had a really interesting product, and we had this novel idea for an operational model to pull it off, but they didn't actually work together. And it was going to take more time and money to figure that out.
I love your answer. The two different answers. So why did you stop? Because what I wanted to do is tie them together. One was working really well. That you stopped. The other one, running out of money and runway, is another reason to stop when investors are saying, hey, it's time to stop.
Sure.
One is You stopped at a level when you were having success.
Yeah.
I've said what I need to say and I need to pull back. The other one was a decision made for you, or you could have
Mm-hmm.
gone raise more money from another investor and try to figure that out. But when things are going well,
Mm-hmm.
you have to you made a decision to stop. But also sometimes when things are not going well, you need to know when to stop. So
Yeah.
the long-winded question here is, how do you know when to stop? Even with your, the dating stuff and all that, you
Yeah.
have a clear cutoff point in your brain. How do you know that?
Yeah.
Teach us that.
You are literally the first person in all of the interviews I've ever had on this topic to make that connection.
Boom.
I love this because it is an excellent question. How do you know when to stop? So I'll tell you the answer I give for when things are not going well. In startup world, things are often not going well. From the day to day, you have a lot of peaks and valleys. And my litmus test for when it's time to hang up the shingle there is as long as you have resources or hope, you can keep going. Usually, as long as you have one, it buys you the runway to line up more of the other. When you run out of both is when it's time to stop.
Yeah. What's
On
more
the
important, resources or hope?
I mean, honestly, I would say hope, but that is from a very privileged perspective, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's a bare amount of resources you need to exist in the world. And a lot of the storytelling we do around entrepreneurship comes from a place of privilege where we say, well, I'm assuming you have a roof over your head. I'm assuming, you're not going to be like evicted or thrown into personal bankruptcy, which is an assumption. Some entrepreneurs have to finagle that. And in the case of Quincy, this was, I didn't have a life partner. I didn't have another source of income in my life. I don't come from family money. I don't even have like a bedroom to go home to if I were to lose my apartment in New York. Like this is, I come from a working class family in Michigan. It was very clear that like you do you, but we don't have $1 to send you. And so there was a bare minimum of like, what do I need to keep my life going? And when I ran out of those funds, we could have raised more money, but I literally didn't have the money to pay my rent the next month. I had to pay my rent with a cash advance off of my credit card.
Yeah.
And there's only so many times you can do that before you hit your credit card limit. So I would like to say hope is more important than resources, but there's also the reality of like sometimes resources are the limiting factor.
Yeah.
In my case, I could have rebuilt resources and taken another stab at this business a year or 2 or 3 later. I've had people come to me since and offer me money to go and rebuild it. And I think in this case, I ran out of hope. There's a reason why the women's fashion industry runs the way it does. And we had the naivete to question that as outsiders, which often is where great disruption comes from. Outsiders saying, why do you do it that way? In this case, there's a good reason, and it's really, really expensive. It's not profitable to make clothes that fit women. There's a long, entire separate conversation on why that is, but it's true. For the most part, it is not profitable to make clothes that fit women because women's bodies vary so dramatically that real fit, is so expensive. It doesn't work on the margins that fashion companies, retailers can work off of. And so when I realized that like this is the way the industry is built, I lost the hope that it could be done dramatically differently, at least in the way that I was designing. Why you quit when you're at the top, I think it's about, and this might be true at the bottom as well, it's about the value of that incremental hour of your life. Are you going to put another hour into this project, whether it's succeeding or failing? Is that the best use of that hour versus putting it somewhere else? And I felt like with our podcast, we told the story we came to tell, and the incremental episode, the incremental hour, was going to be the cherry on top, but it wasn't going to change anything. It wasn't going to provide an insight that I felt we hadn't found yet. But the incremental hour applied somewhere else, working on my next book maybe, felt like it really could blow something wide open.
you are you are an interesting person. You are a dynamic person, and it's so fun to talk with different people and to learn about you
Mm,
as a human and how you approach life. There's going to be other conversations in the future, I'm sure, but as I look at the clock, we're running out of time, and there's
mhm.
things that I must do as a host for
Sure,
you and for my audience. You mentioned another book, so that means you wrote one at least, right?
I did.
Okay,
I've written
talk.
two now.
Cool. All right. I should know this, right? Like, do your research, Josh,
It's
you
all
idiot.
good.
Tell us about your
Sure.
books, and where people could go to find it.
Sure. So my first book was called New to Big, and it is specifically for large companies, for managers and leaders in large companies who want to build new things. Anyone who's in a big company knows building new things is really freaking hard. And so this, it has a long subtitle that I'm going to slaughter, but it's basically what large enterprises can steal from, can learn from entrepreneurs and venture capital investors,
Cool.
so they can build like entrepreneurs, invest like VCs, and I don't know, build the future. Don't quote me on
Yeah.
that.
This
But
is your book.
it is my book, you know. So it's a lot about how do you take the frameworks and the tools and the mindsets of early stage
Yeah.
entrepreneurship and venture capital. How do you apply them in big companies?
Cool.
The second book, which is coming out in April of 2023, is called The Portfolio Life. And this is a lot more personal. This is about how do you take this idea of diversification and building a portfolio that we've been talking about this entire hour? How do you apply that to your life? And it's not just your career. Career is obviously a big part of life for anyone who's ambitious and wants to build something that matters. But career is only one piece. You have relationships, you have personal development, you might have a spiritual practice, you have your health, which is often something that we overlook until the point that it's broken. So, how do you think about managing your life the same way you might manage your financial portfolio? And how do you set that investment thesis? How do you set those allocations? And then what are the tools to actually operationalize that portfolio?
Does that seem, and I know that you care deeply about people, and that's why you teach, that's why you write, that's why you
Mm-hmm.
share, that's why you mentor, that's why you invest. You
Mm-hmm.
care deeply about people. Does that seem cold and calculated, taking a look at people and saying, as a portfolio, I could have this kind of investment into this person or that?
Yeah.
Like, how do you marry those two, where deep care and empathy versus
Yeah.
cold calculated risk assessment?
Josh, you should know this by now. It's and, not or. It's
I should know that.
I even call it out in the book. I'm like, you can chalk this up to the crass capitalistic mindset of a business school professor, but hear me out. What you do, you could, right? The multiverse. You could be so many people. You could have so many lives. And every minute of time, you are making choices about what you do, how you invest your time, what you say yes to, what you say no to. The multiplicity of it all can feel overwhelming. You have to have a strategy. If you want to really, if you want to live a life that brings you joy, that gives you meaning, that leaves you with a legacy where you have impact, you have to have a strategy, because you could do a lot of things. But what do you want to do? What should you do with your time? And so I don't think it's cold and calculating to be strategic about where you invest yourself, who you say yes to, and who you say no to. And that is as true of what job you take, what company you align yourself with. When you, I talk about this quite a bit, when do you fiercely defend your boundaries? And when do you relax them in order to achieve the bigger thing that you care about, right? When do you say yes to pulling the all-nighter at work? And when do you say, absolutely not? I have a family, I have a life. That's not what I signed up for. Both of those can be valid choices, but you want to know when that is true for you so that you don't burn out, so that you don't end up living a life that someone else is impressed by, but was never actually fulfilling for you. The world does not need more unhappy billionaires.
Yeah.
We have plenty of them, and they're kind of ruining everything right now. So how can you be happy, joyful, doing something that actually brings you fulfillment? That is a world-changing mindset.
Where can people go to connect with you, buy your books, learn more about you?
Great question. My website, ChristinaWallace.com, easy place. You can send me a note through there. The book is called The Portfolio Life. You can obviously hit it up on the very typical book retailers. I'm supposed to be agnostic about where you buy it from. Find it at your favorite place to buy a book. I also narrated the audiobook. So if you're into audiobooks and you want to hear more of my mellifluous voice, that's an option as well. And of course, on all socials, I'm CM Walla. It's Christina Marie Wallace. It was my email address in college, and I just kept it. So CM Walla on all socials.
Okay. There's just a few more that I've got to ask.
Sure.
You mentioned chorus practice and a
Mhm.
musician. What
Yes.
musical instrument do you play?
My primary instrument for 17 years was piano.
Okay.
But then I had a brief dalliance with cello. I played that for about 9 years. But my longest lasting musical endeavor has been singing. I've been a chorister for, how old am I? I'm 39, so probably 30 years of my life.
No kidding.
And have sung at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center. I've been paid to sing at weddings and funerals and a whole bunch of other places. I've actually made money as a professional musician. So it feels so strange to me because I don't identify as a singer. I identify as a pianist. Back to our first question of identity. But yeah, singing, I'm a mezzo soprano and I mostly do choral work, but a little bit of opera here and there as well.
Really? I can't even probably say the name of it, but we were just listening to some opera, which was funny. It's Porti Ray or something. Anyways, Will Ferrell sang it in Step Brothers. So this is how unsophisticated I am. But we went back and we listened to the actual, so he did it and it's funny. He's like a Catalina wine mixer and it was beautiful. But I went back and I listened to the original, and opera is so very intense and emotional.
Yes.
And I'm listening to this. I'm an that word guy. I grew up on a construction site.
Yeah.
Why did you choose that? Why did you choose that? I'm super curious.
So I picked up singing in elementary school as a way to be part of an ensemble. Piano is a very lonely instrument.
Yeah.
If you are studying it to any degree of professional ambition, you are practicing 6 hours a day by yourself in a studio, which I was all the way up through. I went to a boarding school for the arts in high school in order to be serious about this. And that was the point where I was like, I can't do this. I can't be alone that many hours a day. Also, listen to Rachmaninoff and Schubert are fun, but that can't be all I do. So singing in a choir was my fun outlet, which is also why I picked up cello in middle school, because I wanted to play in an orchestra. And cello, I love playing cello, but it's a big instrument, and you fly around the world, you got to buy a seat for it. It's heavy. It comes with a lot of gear. Singing is just your voice. It's easily, transportable. It's not hard. You can just pop into a choir and join them for the fun of it. And so it became the thing that was really easy to sustain into adulthood. In college, I had multiple jobs in college, but one of them ended up being as a staff singer at a big church, a Presbyterian church in Atlanta. So I got paid to sing every Sunday and do solos and sometimes conduct the choir. And then I ended up teaching high school choir and handbells and orchestra. You just sort of get pulled in this portfolio thing. This has been true my entire life. I do a lot of things, and so singing ended up just being that for me. And there's something about choral singing. There's some research actually behind this, that when you study the heartbeats and the breathing patterns of choral singers, they actually reach a state that you also see in people in deep meditation, because you're syncing your breathing and you end up syncing your heart rate to 20, 30, 100 other people. You're in this moment where you have just pure presence. You're all in this exact moment, doing this thing together. There's nothing more grounding.
Mhm.
And then every once in a while, you have a moment of magic. You hit the intonation so perfectly that you hear an overtone in the room. It literally, the room becomes part of the music making, where like the vibrations
It
of the
vibrates.
architecture
Yeah.
creates a note that no one else is singing, but that is part of the harmonic overtones,
That's
the
cool.
physics of it all. It's insane. It's so fulfilling. And then I started my career at the Metropolitan Opera. It was my first job out of college. I spent 2 years working at the Met. And that's when I really fell in love with opera. You're right. It's dramatic. It's a little bit overwhelming sometimes, but it is just, there's nothing like people projecting that kind of sound at you.
Yeah.
That it's just, it's an experience. So it's forever and ever. It's one of the things that right now is on pause while I've got kids. It's hard to squeeze in 3 hours of a choir rehearsal here and there. Also during a pandemic, incredibly dangerous to, spit in the same room with 100 other people.
A
I'm not
6 feet of
joking.
separation would be a
When the
huge
when the
auditorium.
pandemic started, one of the first mass casualties was an older choir in Seattle. That was one of the first pieces of evidence that they thought this might be airborne, because singing was so dangerous. So I am very hopeful as the world returns to normal and as my kids get a little older that I can rejoin my choral practice.
2 more questions, and then I've
Sure.
got to go. My sister was in chorus growing up, so I was dragged into, but then I found a
Mhm.
love for it. They were fun, but a lot of movies, a lot of musicals,
Yes.
Hairspray, Grease, Sister
Yes.
Act, West Side Story, Sound of Music. I just wrote, Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables.
Uh-huh.
I probably pronounced that wrong. Out of all your favorite musical, what is your favorite musical ever?
Musical or movie musical? Because those are two different questions.
Ooh, movie musical.
Newsies.
Great movie. I love the flat caps, and Christian Bale did an
Christian
incredible job.
Bale. I mean,
So
and the
good.
dancing,
So good.
there's nothing like, 40, 12-year-old boys doing some sincere choreography down the streets of New York. No, Newsies is my favorite movie musical. Probably my favorite musical. This one is hard, but I'm a big Stephen Sondheim fan. And Merrily We Roll Along is an incredibly problematic is not the right word. It's not problematic in like the 2023 sense of the word. It's just, it doesn't, the book, the script, it doesn't quite work, but the music is brilliant. And the idea is brilliant. And someday someone is going to figure out how to fix it so that the musical itself is brilliant. But there's a lot of people trying. And it's probably my favorite one, if I'm being honest.
Thank you for being honest. What question should I have asked you during this interview that I screwed up and did not ask you?
Oh, I don't know. You've asked some really good questions.
Thank you.
Maybe a book that I would recommend that is not something I've written.
Okay. Something that you have not written. What book would you recommend to? Let me be specific on this. For
Yes.
someone who's listening in the audience who is a visionary, who is creative, who has a hard time just saying that this is the one thing. Maybe they're more of a diversified portfolio life like you described, but they need some encouragement. What book would you recommend for them?
I'm going to have to go with Clay Christensen's How Will You Measure Your Life?
So good. Yep.
So he was my professor and mentor at business school.
Oh, really?
And
And he even did innovation. He wrote the book on.
He literally created the version of disruption that we all refer to when we talk about disruption in the tech world. So he was my mentor, and he originally gave that talk that became the book, How Will You Measure Your Life? Yeah. He gave that talk to my 80-person class in 2009, right after he had been diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
And it was, without a doubt, the most important 80 minutes of my entire MBA education. It's this idea like you can do so many things, and it's in our training and it's in our ethos as business people and as Americans to focus on the stuff that is easily quantifiable, right? You do the thing where you're going to get the raise, or you're going to get the and immediate feedback that was a good use of your time. It's so easy, and this is why we lean very hard into our careers, and that there are so many other parts of your life that matter that might be a lot harder to measure.
Yeah.
And so you have to be intentional about, as he says in the title, how will you measure your life, and how will you allocate your resources into the pieces that you say matter. He gave that talk to us. I thought this was incredibly, world changing. I asked him to give it to our entire graduating class, and he did. And that turned into an HBR article, which then turned into the book. And honestly, I think the impact of that book is greater than the impact of his initial Innovator's Dilemma book.
Yeah.
And I think it is for everyone who has a lot of things they could do with their life. The question is, what do you want? And how will you measure it? What does it mean for you to be on your deathbed and feel like that was a really good use of my life?
We did it.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that book.
Such a good book. Yeah. Someone gave me that book 2012-ish, and I was doing a lot and building a tech company, and he said, you need to read this. And that is, I think I have it on my shelf or over there. Nice job. Christina, you are phenomenal, and thank you for being a guest on the Deal Scout. What I love about this show is sometimes we talk about deals, but we talk about the deal maker and the journey and everything. And you gave me a lot of permission today to take a different approach to life and how I invest and how my portfolio of life looks like. So thank you for that.
I'm very happy. Thank you for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. All right, fellow deal makers in the audience, as always, reach out to our guests and say thank you. Buy their books, follow their stuff. Their contact information will be in the show notes below. So let's be an audience of gratitude and thanks for what they've invested in you today. And if you have some wisdom, some deal-making stories or journeys, or maybe a deal that you'd like to talk about here on the show, thedealscout.com is a great place to go. Fill out a quick form, maybe get you on the show next. I love you guys, and we'll talk to you all on the next episode. Bye, everybody.